Hey everybody, welcome to a little video I call an impeachment primer. And the first question you may have is, did Bob really say primer? This may be a longer video than I anticipated, so I may break this up into two parts just because I want to keep your attention and not to toot my own horn, but I think a lot of what I'm saying here has an importance and it will really help you understand what's been going on. How much do you really know about this impeachment effort against our current president, Donald J. Trump? When did it begin? When was it first mentioned? Now, this video is in no way intended to be anything close to a comprehensive history, as it would literally take hours to lay out the facts succinctly. However, I can give you broad brushstrokes of the history to destroy this man and to render inoperable his ability to fulfill his promises. If you'd like a more detailed history, it's out there. Now, a couple books that I have I would highly recommend to you. The first one is by one of my favorite YouTube podcasters named Dan Bongino. It's called Exonerated, the Failed Takedown of President Donald Trump by the Swamp. I'd urge you to buy the book, and I'd also urge you to check out his YouTube channel. Dan, who is a retired Secret Service agent, worked on the president's protective detail, and a retired New York City police officer, generally seems to be a hop, skip, and a jump ahead of a lot of people regarding what's being investigated and what gas is about to bubble up from the swamp. Now, there are two other books I think should be required reading, and they're both by a man named Greg Jarrett. The first is called The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton and to frame Donald Trump, followed by his newest release, called Witch Hunt, the story of the greatest mass delusion in American political history. Now, I got Exonerated and Witch Hunt from Premier Collectibles because the author signed the books. Now, Greg appears on the Fox News channel, and he is a lawyer, and this legal mind shines through in the way he writes his books. They are very well laid out. The language is very concise. He's got footnotes. It's truly a pleasure to read these books. And my hope is that when this is all over and all the dominoes have fallen, that he will take all of the information and rewrite it in a chronological order from day one to day final, if there is such a day. One of the most important things to realize about President Trump is that he is a square peg that people were trying to force into a round hole. And then candidate Trump made it clear that he was happy being a square peg and that he intended to remain a square peg. He made it clear from the very start that the only business as usual was going to be his business as usual. The deep state and the swamp had plenty of advance notice of his intent, but certainly they probably laughed at him and shrugged off any chance he had of being nominated, all the less being elected, until it became clear that at least some possibility existed that he could be elected. So let's define something. Let's define the deep state and the swamp. These are my definitions. Not everybody's going to agree with them, but this is how I see them. For me, the deep state are non-elected political insiders. And if you look up the definition of deep state, you can see that the liberal media is a step ahead as usual in defining language. It's a liberal media liberal thing now that they get to define language to meet their needs and to change anything that might be inconvenient away from that. What they suggest is that the deep state exists to make things run smoothly and that the right has turned their existence into a conspiracy. How convenient. I feel there's part truth, at least in the first half of that. I know there are people that make government service their life, people who don't base their actions on their political beliefs. Then there are those who base every action on trying to make sure their policy vision is carried out. Every department in the government has them. They are parasitic infestations that leech off of the people of the United States. They gain nourishment and strength from the power they accumulate and force the rudder of government to steer our democratic republic the direction that they feel is most beneficial for them. These can be people from the Department of State, the Department of Justice, the White House, the Congress of the United States, and the intelligence agencies. Now, the swamp creatures are much alike the deep staters in that they feel a very close kinship to their brothers and sisters in the deep state. And they feel as though their vision is the vision that should rule, and they will lie, cheat, slander, libel, defame, and cause destruction to anyone who does not follow their prescribed path. Now, these swamp creatures would include the never-Trumpers. They would also include the rhinos, Republicans in name only, members of the House and of the Senate who've grown rich, fabulously rich, over decades of power grabbing, and most of all, the left-leaning liberal hack media. You should never, ever underestimate the power that the radio, TV, print, and social media have over the average voter. Now, please indulge me on this little sidebar. In my way of thinking, there are three basic types of said voter. Number one is that voter that pays little or no attention to anything or anyone, and they just vote the party line. Then number two, there is the low information voter, and this is the term I have to credit Rush Limbaugh for simply because I first heard it on his show. I'm not sure if he coined it or not, but it's a great term. The low information voter hears what their friends have to say or what People magazine thinks. They like being part of a movement, being part of a cause, but they essentially float out on the periphery and let the tide take them where it may. When you ask these voters why they believe what they do, they're not sure. But in their lack of knowledge, they're quite certain they are right. Someone very dear to me asked me what I thought about Trump being a rapist. And I replied that President Trump isn't a rapist. And they replied, oh, yes, he is. I asked them where they got their information. They said it's all over the internet. You can find it anywhere. So after a couple of minutes of this back and forth discussion, I invited this person to sit down at a computer and show me any article that provided any evidence of what they said was true. This offer was declined with some anger and frustration. The third type of voter is one who does their research, who does their homework and does their own thinking based on reading from multiple sources, both friendly and not friendly, and then coming to conclusions that they can stand on and defend. And we need many, many more of these voters and less of the number two voter, the low information voter. And at that point, it becomes an effort to educate that second voter. The first variety of voter will likely always be a straight party ticket voter. Once again, I apologize for that diversion, but it makes an important point. We have so many low information voters who are more than content to let social media, the news stations, and the newspapers and their friends shape and influence their way of thinking. It becomes simple math. Mary believes Trump colluded with Russia. I like Mary, so therefore Trump colluded with Russia. Chances are they can't tell you why they think Trump colluded with Russia, only that they're quite sure that he did. They may or may not even remember that Mary was their original trusted source of information. Back to the swamp. The mentions of the impeachment of Donald J. Trump began before he ever took office. I'm willing to bet that they started before he was ever even elected. Most certainly, the CIA and the FBI were positioning themselves to take him down. Even on the day of his inauguration, the Independent and the Washington Post Both made mention of plans that were already underway to impeach the new president. This was happening within an hour of him being inaugurated. Now, can you imagine the sustained effort against the duly elected president of the United States that has ground on for 3 years thanks to a House of Representatives that's more focused on their hatred of a man who won't play their game than they are on passing legislation to help the people who put them in office? Can you imagine what would happen if the low information voters in their districts became a little more savvy, a little more aware, and decided to cut their stay at the Hotel Congress short the next time they come up for election? There are many prongs to these efforts to nullify the election. Do you remember Stormy Daniels, a porn star, and her now forgotten and disgraced lawyer who was on CNN hundreds of times promising dirt against President Trump that he could never deliver? Do you remember his name off the top of your head? Time's up. It was Michael Avenatti. Where is he now? Oh yeah, he's fighting his own legal battles that surfaced once he unadvisedly stuck his toe into the swamp to see how welcoming it might be. Michael, they eat their own. Outsiders never stand a chance, and your pitch never made it to the catcher's mitt. Then it was proclaimed that President Trump, then candidate Donald J. Trump, colluded with the Russians. And once the fact that there is no such crime as collusion was beaten like a dead horse, the language was changed. The accusation was changed to one of conspiracy on behalf of Donald J. Trump and people associated with him. My honest belief is that this single hoax is going to change politics forever. It will damage reputations beyond repair and institutions beyond repair. This dossier was commissioned on behalf of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was called the Steele dossier, although this ex-MI6 agent probably had about as much to do with it as Robert Mueller did with the Mueller investigation. What did I say? What does that mean? Well, both the so-called Steele dossier and the Mueller investigation into President Trump colluding with the Russians needed a presentable book cover. The FISA courts couldn't be allowed to know the actual origins of the quickly debunked dossier information any more than the American public should be allowed to know and understand that Robert Mueller knew or understood little or nothing about the report that bore his name. If you have a scintilla of doubt about that, go check out his testimony in front of Congress. It's all over the internet. I actually felt a wee bit sorry for him because he had that deer in the headlights look, which showed he had no idea what was coming at him. He was pitiful, and he was proof that although he was there, it was the hand-picked anti-Trump individuals with a specific agenda to destroy the president that were actually driving that locomotive. Now, that failed in spectacular fashion, but part 3 was waiting in the wings.